The doors of the great hall swung open with a sound like thunder, and the crowd inside went silent in an instant. Princess Alara stood at the top of the marble steps, her pale blue gown catching the torchlight, her face carefully still. She hated this hall. She hated the smell of it, a mixture of perfume and fear that no incense could ever cover. But today, like every year before it, she had no choice but to walk down those steps and take her place beside her father's throne. Below her, rows of people stood chained to wooden posts, waiting to be sold. Some held their heads high, refusing to let their fear show. Others trembled, their eyes darting toward the crowd of nobles who examined them like cattle at a market. Alara had seen this sight every year since she was 10 years old, and every year it made her stomach turn. Her father, King Aldrich, sat on his throne at the edge of the platform, his crown catching the light of 100 candles. He did not look at her as she approached. He rarely did, these days. Since her mother's death 3 years ago, something had closed off in him, like a door that no longer opened, no matter how hard she knocked. "Come, princess," called a voice from the center of the hall. "The auction master is waiting." Alara's eyes moved to the man who had spoken, Corvin. He stood on a raised wooden platform, dressed in a coat of deep crimson, his hands folded behind his back. He smiled at her the way a snake might smile if it had lips, all teeth and no warmth. She had known Corvin since she was a child. He had always been a fixture at court, a man who seemed to know everyone and owe nothing to anyone. Her father trusted him. The nobles feared him. And Alara, if she was honest with herself, had never trusted him at all. "Every year," Corvin said, raising his voice so the whole hall could hear, "it is tradition that the royal family selects one worker from the auction as a gift, a symbol of the crown's generosity and wisdom." He gestured grandly toward the chained figures behind him. "This year, the honor falls to our beloved Princess Alara." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Alara felt dozens of eyes turn toward her, waiting, watching. She glanced at her father. He gave the smallest nod, the kind of nod that meant, "Do not embarrass me." She descended the last few steps and walked toward the platform, her slippers silent against the stone floor. The closer she got, the more clearly she could see the faces of those waiting to be chosen. A young man with broad shoulders stood near the front, clearly placed there because buyers favored strength. Beside him stood a woman with striking red hair, dressed in a fine gown meant to catch the eye of wealthy merchants. Everywhere Alara looked, she saw people arranged like pieces in a display window, each one positioned to seem as valuable as possible. "Take your time, princess," Corvin said smoothly. "Choose wisely. Choose someone worthy of the crown's generosity." Alara walked slowly along the line, her hands folded in front of her, her expression unreadable. She had done this before, years past, when she was younger and had not yet understood what these choices truly meant. Back then, she had simply pointed at whoever seemed least afraid, hoping that meant they would be treated well. But this year felt different. This year, something in her chest told her to look closer. She passed the strong young man. She passed the woman with red hair. She passed a pair of twins, no older than 16, holding hands so tightly their knuckles had turned white. Her heart ached for them, but something pulled her attention elsewhere, toward the back of the group, where the shadows were deepest. There, almost forgotten, stood an old man. He was thin, his shoulders bent forward as though carrying an invisible weight. His hair was white and thin, his skin marked with old scars that told stories no one had bothered to ask about. He did not look at the crowd. He did not try to appear strong or valuable. He simply stood there, staring at some point on the floor, as if he had long ago stopped expecting anyone to choose him. Alara stopped walking. "Princess?" Corvin's voice carried a note of surprise. "Is something wrong?" She did not answer right away. She studied the old man for a long moment, taking in the deep lines on his face, the calluses on his hands, the quiet dignity in the way he stood despite everything. There was something about him, something she could not name, that made her feel as though she was looking at a puzzle with a missing piece. "Who is this man?" she asked. Corvin stepped down from his platform, his crimson coat sweeping behind him. He glanced at the old man with barely concealed disinterest. A nobody, princess. Once a servant in some noble house, long since fallen out of use. He was included in this lot only to fill numbers. I would not waste your generosity on him. His name, Elara said again, more firmly this time. What is his name? A pause. Corvin's smile faltered, just for a moment, before returning to its usual polished shape. Bastian, I believe. Does it matter? Elara looked back at the old man. For the first time, he lifted his eyes and met hers. There was something in that gaze, something sharp and knowing, buried beneath years of exhaustion. It was not the look of a broken man. It was the look of someone who had survived something terrible and had chosen, against all odds, to keep his mind clear and his spirit intact. I choose him, Elara said. The hall fell into stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then the whispers began, rippling outward like waves on a still pond. Nobles leaned toward one another, hands covering mouths, eyes wide with disbelief. Somewhere near the front, a woman laughed nervously, as though waiting for the princess to correct herself. Corvin's composure cracked, just slightly. Princess, surely you jest. There are far more suitable choices here. The young man with the strong back would make an excellent addition to your household staff. Or perhaps the woman with the fine bearing. She could serve as a companion. I said I choose him, Elara repeated, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her chest. Bastian, that is my choice. King Aldrich shifted on his throne, his brow furrowing. Elara, he said quietly, though the hall was so silent that even a whisper carried. Are you certain? She turned to face her father, and for the first time in a long while, she did not lower her eyes. Yes, father, I am certain. The king studied her for a long moment. Something passed across his face, an emotion Elara could not quite identify. Was it concern, suspicion, or something else entirely? Some memory stirred by the sight of an old man standing quietly in a crowd. Whatever it was, he said nothing more. He simply nodded, once, and looked away. Corvin did not look pleased. His jaw tightened, and for just a moment, Elara saw something flash behind his eyes, something cold and calculating that had nothing to do with the smooth, charming mask he wore for the court. But he recovered quickly, bowing low with exaggerated grace. As the princess wishes, he said. Bastian will be delivered to the palace by morning. Elara nodded once and turned to walk away, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. She could feel the eyes of the entire court on her back, feel the questions forming in 100 minds. Why him? What does she know? What is she planning? The truth was, she did not fully know herself. She only knew that something about the old man's eyes had spoken to her in a language deeper than words, a silent plea, or perhaps a silent warning. And Elara had learned, over years of watching her father rule a kingdom built on secrets, that the things people tried hardest to hide were often the things most worth uncovering. As she climbed the steps back toward the throne, she allowed herself one last glance over her shoulder. Bastian was still watching her, his expression unreadable, his back straight despite his frailty. For a brief moment, she thought she saw the corner of his mouth lift, not quite a smile, but something close to it, something like recognition. She did not understand it yet, but she intended to find out. That night, the palace felt different to Elara, as though the very stones remembered something the people living within them had long forgotten. She sat by her window, looking out over the moonlit gardens, replaying the scene in the auction hall over and over in her mind. Why had she chosen him? She could not explain it fully, not even to herself. It had felt less like a decision and more like an instinct, a pull she could not ignore. A soft knock came at her door. Her handmaiden, Lyra, entered with a small bow. "Princess," Lyra said, "the old man has arrived. He is being held in the east wing, as you requested." Alara stood quickly. "Take me to him." Lyra hesitated. "At this hour? Princess, it would be more proper to wait until morning. The court will already be talking about your choice. If you are seen visiting him tonight—" "I do not care what the court says," Ilara said, more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. "Please, Lyra, I need to speak with him. Tonight." Lyra studied her for a moment, then nodded, understanding that arguing further would be pointless. "Very well, Princess. Follow me." They moved through the quiet corridors of the palace, past sleeping guards and flickering torches, until they reached a small chamber near the east wing, far from the grand rooms reserved for honored guests. It was clean, at least, with a simple bed and a single window, but it was clear this was not a place meant for someone of importance. Ilara made a mental note to have him moved somewhere better in the morning. Bastian sat on the edge of the bed when she entered, his hands folded in his lap. He looked up as she stepped inside, and this time there was no exhaustion in his eyes, only sharp, careful attention. "Princess," he said, his voice rough but steady, "I did not expect a visit so soon." "I have questions," Ilara said, closing the door behind her. Lyra remained outside, standing guard. "And I think you have answers." Bastian studied her for a long moment before gesturing to the single chair near the window. "Then perhaps you should sit. This may take some time." Ilara sat, her heart beating fast with anticipation. "Why did I choose you? I need to understand. There was something about you, something in your eyes, that felt familiar. Have we met before?" A long silence stretched between them. Bastian's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the moon hanging low over the palace gardens. "Not exactly, Princess. But you have seen my face before, even if you do not remember it. I once served in this very palace, many years ago, before you were born. I was the royal physician, trusted by kings and queens alike, respected among my peers." Ilara's breath caught. "A physician? What happened?" Bastian's hands tightened slightly in his lap. "I was accused of a crime I did not commit, poisoning a nobleman who had grown too powerful for his own good. The evidence against me was false, manufactured by someone who wanted me gone, though I never fully understood why until much later. I was stripped of my title, my home, everything I had built over decades of service, and then I was sold, passed from one household to another, forgotten by everyone who once called me friend." "Who accused you?" Ilara asked, though some part of her already feared the answer. Bastian met her eyes, and in that moment she saw the weight of years of suffering pressed into every line of his face. "The evidence pointed to many hands, Princess, but the man who orchestrated the accusation, the one who profited most from my downfall, was someone still very much present in your father's court today." Ilara's pulse quickened. "Who?" Bastian hesitated, glancing toward the door as though worried someone might be listening. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. "The auction master, Corvin." The name hung in the air between them like a blade. Ilara felt a chill run through her body, colder than anything the night breeze could explain. She thought of Corvin's smooth smile, his practiced charm, the way he had tried to steer her away from choosing Bastian in the first place. "Are you certain?" she asked, though she already suspected the truth. "As certain as a man can be after years of piecing together fragments of memory and rumor," Bastian said. "Corvin was a minor merchant back then, ambitious but unimportant. My downfall marked the beginning of his rise. He took over trade routes that had once been protected by the nobleman I was accused of poisoning. He gained favor with your father's advisors. Piece by piece, he built the position he now holds, using the ashes of ruined lives as the foundation." Ilara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She thought of her mother, who had died under circumstances that had never been fully explained, officially ruled as illness, though whispers of poison had followed the family for years afterward. She thought of the strange tightness in her father's expression whenever anyone mentioned those final months of her mother's life. "There is more, isn't there?" she asked quietly. "This is not only about you." Bastian's expression grew grave. I do not know everything, Princess, but I have heard things, over the years, passed between servants and merchants, who did not know I once held a position of trust. Whispers about your mother's death. Whispers that do not match the official story. I cannot promise you truth, only threads worth pulling. Ilara felt something harden inside her chest, a resolve she had not known she possessed until this very moment. For years, she had accepted the silence surrounding her mother's death, told herself that grief simply worked that way, that some wounds never fully closed. But now, sitting across from a man who had lost everything to the same shadows that seemed to surround her family, she could no longer accept simple explanations. I need you to tell me everything you remember, she said. Every detail, no matter how small. I need to understand what happened to you, and I need to understand what happened to my mother. And if Corvin is responsible for either, I intend to see him answer for it. Bastian studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his tired eyes. That is a dangerous path you are choosing, Princess. Corvin has spent years building alliances, securing loyalty through fear and favor alike. If he learns you are investigating him, he will not hesitate to protect himself, whatever the cost. I am not afraid of him, Ilara said, though even as she spoke the words, she felt a small tremor of uncertainty beneath her resolve. Perhaps you should be, Bastian said quietly. Fear, used wisely, keeps us careful. And in the days ahead, Princess, you will need to be very careful indeed. Outside, the moon climbed higher over the palace, casting long shadows across the gardens below. Somewhere in the east wing, two people sat together in a small, plain room, unaware that their quiet conversation had already set into motion events that would shake the foundations of the kingdom itself. Ilara did not yet know how deep the corruption ran, how many hands had been stained by Corvin's ambition, or how close to home the danger truly was. But she knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones like iron, that she could not turn back now. The choice she had made in that auction hall, the choice everyone believed to be strange, even foolish, had been the first step on a path toward truth. And Ilara intended to walk that path to its very end, whatever waited for her there. As Lyra led her back through the quiet corridors toward her chambers, Ilara paused at a window overlooking the courtyard where the auction had taken place hours earlier. The platforms were empty now, the chains removed, the crowd long since dispersed to their beds and their comfortable lives. But Ilara could still feel the weight of that afternoon pressing against her chest, the memory of dozens of frightened faces, the memory of Corvin's cold, calculating eyes. Tomorrow the court would wake and continue as though nothing unusual had happened. Tomorrow, Corvin would resume his duties, smiling his practiced smile, playing his careful games. But Ilara would no longer be the same princess who had walked into that hall that morning, dutiful and unquestioning. Something had shifted inside her, a spark of purpose that would not easily be extinguished. She thought of her father, sitting alone on his throne, carrying secrets he had never shared with her. She thought of her mother, gone too soon, her death wrapped in whispers no one dared speak aloud. And she thought of Bastian, an old man who had lost everything to lies and ambition, waiting years for someone, anyone, to finally listen. Ilara intended to listen, and more than that, she intended to act. As she finally reached her chambers and closed the door behind her, she caught her reflection in the tall mirror standing near her window. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, her eyes sharper, her jaw set with a determination she had never quite recognized in herself before. She thought of the strong young man at the auction, the woman with red hair, the twins holding hands so tightly. She thought of all the choices she had never questioned before tonight. Something had to change, not just for Bastian, not just for her mother, but for everyone whose lives had been shaped by silence and secrets within these palace walls. Ilara sat down at her writing desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment, and began to write. If she was going to uncover the truth about Corvin, about her mother, about everything hidden beneath the surface of her father's court, she would need a plan. She would need allies, and she would need to move carefully, for the man she was about to challenge had spent years learning how to destroy anyone who threatened his position. But Ilara was no longer simply a princess following tradition. She was someone determined to find the truth, whatever the cost, however long it took. And as the candle burned low beside her, casting flickering shadows across the parchment, filled with careful notes and questions, she made herself a silent promise. She would not stop until she understood everything, and she would not let Corvin or anyone else silence the truth any longer. The night stretched on, quiet and still, but within the palace walls, something had irreversibly changed. A single choice made in a crowded auction hall had planted the first seed of a reckoning that would, in time, shake the entire kingdom to its foundations. Ilara did not yet know how far the roots of corruption reached, nor how many more secrets waited to be uncovered. But she knew, with unwavering certainty, that she had only just begun. Morning came slowly over the palace, gray light spilling through the tall windows of the east wing. Ilara had barely slept, her mind circling endlessly around the words Bastian had spoken the night before. Corvin. The name sat heavy in her thoughts, refusing to be pushed aside no matter how she tried to focus on anything else. She rose before dawn and dressed quickly, choosing a simple gown instead of the elaborate court dresses she usually wore. Today was not a day for appearances. Today, she needed to move quietly, to think clearly, and to begin gathering whatever pieces of truth she could find before anyone noticed what she was doing. Lyra arrived to help with her hair, though Ilara waved her off gently. "Not today, Lyra. I need something simpler. And I need you to do something for me, something important." Lyra's eyes narrowed with concern. "Princess, whatever this is about, I worry it is not safe." "I know," Ilara admitted, "but I cannot ignore what I learned last night. I need to find out more about my mother's final months." "Was there ever a physician who attended her, besides the royal healer everyone knew? Any records, any names, anything unusual?" Lyra hesitated, glancing toward the door as though someone might be listening even now. "There were whispers, Princess, years ago, among the older servants. They said your mother grew ill very suddenly, and that the healers who attended her seemed uncertain of the cause. Some even said the symptoms did not match any illness they recognized." Ilara's chest tightened. "Why did no one ever tell me this?" "Because your father forbade any discussion of it," Lyra said quietly. "He said it caused the household too much grief, that dwelling on unanswered questions would only prolong the pain. Most servants who remembered those days were eventually reassigned, or retired, or simply stopped speaking of it out of respect for the king's wishes." Ilara felt a slow burn of anger building inside her, directed not at her father exactly, but at the silence that had swallowed the truth for so many years. "I need names, Lyra. Anyone still living who might remember those final months clearly. Servants, healers, anyone." Lyra nodded slowly. "I will ask carefully, Princess. But please, be cautious. If Corvin is truly involved in something dangerous, as this old man claims, then asking too many questions too quickly could put you at risk." "I understand," Ilara said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. But she was not entirely certain she could be as careful as the situation demanded, not when every part of her wanted answers immediately. After Lyra left to begin her quiet inquiries, Ilara made her way toward the east wing once more, eager to speak with Bastian again before the day's court duties consumed her time. She found him already awake, sitting by the window, watching the gardens below with quiet, thoughtful eyes. Someone, likely under Lyra's instruction, had brought him fresh clothing and a simple meal, though he had barely touched the food. "Princess," he greeted her, rising slightly despite his frailty. "You look as though you slept little." "I could not stop thinking," she admitted, taking the same chair as the night before. "I spoke with my handmaiden this morning. She confirmed there were unusual circumstances surrounding my mother's illness. Healers who could not identify the cause. A silence that fell over the household soon after." Bastian's expression grew solemn. I feared as much. During my years in exile, passed between merchant houses and noble estates, I heard fragments of rumors about the queen's death. Servants gossip more than nobles realize, and secrets have a way of traveling even when everyone believes they are contained. What did you hear? Elara pressed. Bastian folded his hands carefully. That the queen's illness began not long after she confronted someone at court about missing funds from the royal treasury. Funds meant for trade agreements along the eastern border. Some believed she had discovered evidence of theft, evidence that pointed toward certain merchants who had grown suspiciously wealthy in a short span of time. Elara's breath caught. Corvin. I cannot say for certain, Bastian said carefully. I only know what I heard secondhand, filtered through years and many retellings. But the timing troubles me greatly. A physician falsely accused and exiled. A queen who dies of an illness no healer could properly explain, shortly after uncovering financial corruption. And a merchant who rises to great power in the years that follow, eventually becoming the very auction master who controls so much of the kingdom's trade in goods and people alike. The pieces were beginning to form a shape in Elara's mind, though the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. She needed more than rumors and half-remembered whispers. She needed proof, something concrete enough to bring before her father, something undeniable enough to force the court to finally confront the truth. I need to see the treasury records, she said suddenly. If my mother discovered evidence of theft, there might still be documents somewhere, records that were never fully destroyed. Bastian's eyes widened slightly. Princess, those records would be closely guarded. Accessing them without raising suspicion would be extremely difficult, particularly if Corvin has spent years ensuring his tracks remain hidden. Then I will need help, Elara said, thinking quickly. Someone with access to the treasury who I can trust completely. Do you know of such a person? Bastian asked. Elara considered the question carefully. The court was full of nobles and officials, most of whom owed their positions, directly or indirectly, to relationships cultivated over years, relationships that often involved favors exchanged with men like Corvin. Trusting the wrong person could unravel everything before she even began. Then, a name surfaced in her memory, someone she had not thought of in years. Master Alden, she said slowly. He served as treasury advisor when I was young, before he was quietly dismissed. I never understood why at the time, only that my father seemed reluctant to discuss it. He always struck me as an honest man, someone who took his duties seriously. Do you know where he can be found now? Bastian asked. I do not, Elara admitted, but I intend to find out. Over the following days, Elara moved carefully through the palace, gathering information in small, careful pieces. She spoke with older servants who remembered Master Alden fondly, learning that he had retired to a small estate near the northern edge of the kingdom after his sudden dismissal from court. She learned that his departure had been abrupt, unexplained, occurring only months before her mother's death. The more she learned, the more the timeline troubled her. Master Alden dismissed, Bastian accused and exiled, her mother growing suddenly ill. Each event seemed to connect to the next, forming a chain that led inevitably toward questions about who had benefited most from the chaos, and who had worked hardest to ensure the truth remained buried. Meanwhile, Elara continued attending her usual court duties, careful to maintain the appearance of ordinary royal life. She sat beside her father during audiences, offered polite conversation during formal dinners, and smiled through interactions with nobles who still whispered about her unusual choice at the auction. She noticed Corvin watching her more closely than usual during these gatherings, his expression carefully neutral, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes whenever their gazes happened to meet. One evening, during a formal dinner held in honor of visiting dignitaries from a neighboring kingdom, Corvin approached her directly, his crimson coat replaced with equally elegant black formal wear befitting the occasion. Princess Elara, he said smoothly, offering a polite bow. I trust your new servant is settling in well. Bastian, was it? He is settling in fine, Alara replied carefully, keeping her expression neutral despite the sudden tension tightening in her chest. How generous of you, to take such interest in someone so easily overlooked by others, Corvin continued, his tone light and conversational, though his eyes remained sharp and watchful. I confess, I was surprised by your choice. Most young royals prefer servants who can offer practical value, strength, skill, beauty. An elderly man of no particular talent seems an unusual decision for someone of your position. Alara forced a small smile. Perhaps I simply appreciate wisdom over strength, auction master. Age often carries knowledge that youth cannot yet possess. Something flickered behind Corvin's eyes, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. How philosophical of you, princess. I look forward to seeing what wisdom your new companion might offer. The comment lingered in the air between them, carrying an unspoken warning that Alara could not fully decipher. Did Corvin suspect something? Had he already begun investigating her sudden interest in an old, forgotten servant? She kept her expression carefully composed, refusing to give him any further reason for suspicion, though her heart pounded uncomfortably beneath her calm exterior. If you'll excuse me, Corvin said finally, offering another polite bow before moving away to continue his rounds among the other guests. Alara watched him go, her mind racing. She needed to move more carefully from this point forward. If Corvin suspected even a fraction of what she had learned, he would undoubtedly take steps to protect himself, steps that could prove dangerous for anyone standing in his way. Later that night, after the formal dinner concluded and the guests retired to their chambers, Alara received an unexpected visitor. Lyra arrived at her door, her expression tense with urgency. "Princess, I have news," she said quietly, closing the door behind her before continuing. "I managed to locate information about Master Alden's estate. He still lives there, though word among the servants suggests he rarely receives visitors and keeps mostly to himself." "That is good news," Alara said, relief flooding through her. "We need to arrange a visit, though we must be careful about how we approach it. If Corvin has spies watching the palace, any obvious departure could draw unwanted attention." "I have already considered this," Lyra said. "There is a seasonal festival held in the northern villages next week, close to Master Alden's estate. Many nobles travel to attend, purchasing goods and enjoying the celebrations. If you were to request permission to attend, citing interest in northern trade and culture, it would provide a reasonable excuse for travel without raising suspicion." Alara considered the plan carefully. It seemed sound, though convincing her father to grant permission might prove challenging given how rarely she requested such excursions. "I will speak with my father tomorrow," she decided. "If he agrees, we travel within the week." The following morning, Alara approached her father in his private study, finding him reviewing reports from various regions of the kingdom. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening slightly, though the familiar distance remained in his eyes. "Alara," he said, setting aside his papers, "what brings you here so early?" "I wish to ask permission to attend the Northern Festival next week," she said, keeping her tone light and casual. "I have grown curious about the trade customs practiced in that region and thought it might be beneficial to observe firsthand, particularly given my recent interest in understanding more about the kingdom's commerce." Her father studied her for a long moment, and Alara wondered if he could sense the deeper motivations hidden beneath her simple request. "This interest in trade," he said slowly, "does it relate to your unusual choice at the auction?" Alara's heart skipped, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Perhaps, father, I have been thinking more carefully about the kingdom's affairs lately. I wish to understand things more fully, rather than simply observing from a distance." Something shifted in her father's expression, a flicker of something that might have been pride, or perhaps concern, or perhaps both intertwined. "Your mother once expressed similar sentiments," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar weight. "She believed a ruler should understand every thread woven into the kingdom's fabric, not merely the threads visible from the throne." "What happened to her, father?" Alara asked gently, seizing the rare opening. I have always been told simply that she fell ill, but I wonder, sometimes, if there is more to the story than I have been allowed to know." Her father's expression closed off immediately, the brief warmth vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Your mother's death was a tragedy, Ilara. Nothing more needs to be understood beyond that simple truth. I would ask you not to dwell on painful memories that cannot be changed." Ilara wanted to press further, wanted to ask directly about the treasury records, about Master Alden, about everything Bastian had told her. But something in her father's guarded expression warned her that pushing too hard, too quickly, would only close whatever small door remained open between them. "Of course, father," she said instead, swallowing her frustration. "May I have your permission to attend the Northern Festival?" He studied her for another long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well. Take proper guards with you and return within the week. I trust you to conduct yourself appropriately." "Thank you, father," Ilara said, offering a respectful bow before leaving his study, her mind already turning toward the preparations needed for the journey ahead. As she walked back through the palace corridors, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread settling in her chest. She was closer now to uncovering the truth than she had ever been before, yet each step forward seemed to carry its own risks, its own dangers she could not fully predict. She thought of Corvin's watchful eyes during the dinner the night before, the careful way he had probed her interest in Bastian, searching for weaknesses or clues about her true intentions. She thought of her father's guarded expression whenever her mother's death was mentioned, the careful walls he had built around that particular grief. Whatever waited for her at Master Alden's estate, whatever truths he might reveal about the treasury records and the events leading up to her mother's death, Ilara knew there would be no turning back once she uncovered them. The path she had chosen, beginning with a single unexpected decision in a crowded auction hall, had already carried her further than she ever imagined, and something told her the journey had only just begun. That evening, as she packed carefully for the journey ahead, Bastian sent word through Lyra, requesting one final conversation before her departure. Ilara made her way to his chambers, finding him seated by the window once more, his expression thoughtful and troubled. "Princess," he said as she entered, "I have been thinking carefully about your planned journey. I believe there is something important I should share before you leave, something I have hesitated to mention until now." "What is it?" Ilara asked, settling into the familiar chair across from him. Bastian took a slow breath before continuing. "Master Alden was not simply dismissed from his position, Princess. I have recalled, over these past days, additional details about the circumstances surrounding his departure. He was removed from court following an argument with Corvin, an argument concerning discrepancies in trade records along the eastern border, the very same discrepancies I believe your mother later discovered." Ilara's pulse quickened. "You believe Master Alden might have proof? Documents? Evidence of what really happened?" "I cannot say for certain," Bastian admitted. "But if such evidence exists anywhere within the kingdom, I believe he is the most likely person to possess it, or at the very least, to know where it might be found." Ilara nodded slowly, resolve hardening within her chest. "Then I will find him, and I will learn the truth, whatever it costs." Bastian studied her carefully, something like worry flickering behind his tired eyes. "Please be careful, Princess. Corvin has spent years protecting the secrets buried in this kingdom's history. If he learns of your intentions before you gather sufficient evidence, he will not hesitate to eliminate whatever threat you pose to his position." "I understand the risk," Ilara said quietly, "but I cannot turn away now, not when I am so close to understanding what truly happened to my mother, and to you, and to everyone else whose lives were destroyed by whatever corruption runs beneath this court." As she left Bastian's chambers that night, preparing herself mentally for the journey ahead, Ilara felt the weight of her decision pressing heavily against her shoulders. She was no longer simply a princess fulfilling obligatory duties, no longer content to accept the comfortable silences that had shaped her entire life within these palace walls. She was determined now, focused entirely on uncovering truths that others had worked hard to bury. And though she could not yet know what dangers waited along the path ahead, she understood, with unwavering certainty that she would face them without hesitation, whatever the cost might ultimately prove to be. The journey north took 2 full days, winding through forested hills and small farming villages that grew increasingly unfamiliar the further Elara traveled from the palace. She rode in a modest carriage, accompanied by only 2 trusted guards, and Lyra, who had insisted on joining her despite the risks involved. Elara had chosen to leave Bastian behind, both for his own safety and because his frail health made such travel unwise, though she promised to return with whatever answers she could find. The Northern Festival, when they finally arrived, proved to be a lively affair, filled with music, colorful banners, and merchants selling goods from every corner of the kingdom. Elara moved through the crowds carefully, playing the part of a curious noble observing local customs, though her true purpose remained hidden beneath the pleasant facade. Master Alden's estate sat on the outskirts of the largest village, a modest but well-maintained property surrounded by neat gardens and a low stone wall. Elara approached alone, leaving her guards near the village entrance to avoid drawing unwanted attention, with only Lyra accompanying her to the estate's entrance. A servant answered their knock, an elderly woman who eyed them with obvious suspicion before Elara explained her purpose, careful to keep her voice low. "Please tell Master Alden that Princess Elara wishes to speak with him," she said. "It concerns matters from his time at court." The servant's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the princess's title, though she said nothing, disappearing into the house to relay the message. Several tense minutes passed before she returned, gesturing for Elara and Lyra to follow her inside. Master Alden waited in a small study lined with books and old documents, his hair now completely gray, his face lined with the marks of age and worry. He rose slowly as Elara entered, offering a careful, formal bow. "Princess Elara," he said, his voice steady despite obvious surprise. "I confess, I never expected to receive a visit from the royal family again. To what do I owe this unexpected honor?" "Please, sit," Elara said gently, taking a seat across from him, as Lyra remained near the door, keeping watch. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but the matter I wish to discuss is delicate, and I did not wish to risk it being intercepted through formal correspondence." Master Alden's expression grew wary. What matter could possibly bring the princess so far from the palace to speak with a forgotten old treasury advisor? Elara took a steadying breath before continuing. "I have recently learned of certain discrepancies in the treasury records from many years ago, discrepancies related to trade agreements along the eastern border. I understand you were dismissed from your position shortly after discovering these irregularities." Master Alden's face paled slightly, his hands tightening on the arms of his chair. "Princess, that is a very dangerous subject to raise, even now, even after all these years." "I understand the risk," Elara said carefully. "But I believe these discrepancies may be connected to my mother's death and to the wrongful exile of a man named Bastian, who once served as royal physician. I need to know the truth, Master Alden, whatever it might reveal." The old man sat in silence for a long moment, his eyes distant, as though traveling back through years of buried memory. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of long-suppressed grief. "I have waited years for someone to ask these questions, Princess. I had nearly given up hope that the truth would ever surface." "Please," Elara urged gently, "tell me everything you remember." Master Alden rose slowly and moved toward a locked cabinet in the corner of the study, retrieving a small key from beneath a loose floorboard hidden under his desk. He unlocked the cabinet carefully, revealing a collection of old documents, carefully preserved despite the passage of years. "I kept these," he said quietly, returning to his seat with a bundle of papers in hand. "I knew, even as I was dismissed from court, that these records held the truth of what really happened. I hoped, someday, someone would come seeking answers, though I confess I never expected it would be the princess herself." He handed the documents to Elara carefully. She examined them with growing horror, finding detailed records of trade agreements along the eastern border, agreements that showed clear evidence of funds being diverted, quietly redirected into accounts that did not match official kingdom ledgers. The signatures on many of the documents, though partially faded with age, were unmistakably clear. Corvin. He was skimming funds meant for the eastern trade routes, Master Alden explained. Small amounts at first, easily hidden within the complexity of official records, but over time, the amounts grew larger, more difficult to conceal. Your mother, may her memory be honored, discovered these discrepancies during a routine review of the Treasury's annual reports. She confronted Corvin directly, though she kept the matter quiet at first, hoping to resolve it discreetly rather than create a public scandal. "What happened then?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. "I do not know the full details," Master Alden admitted. "I was dismissed from my position shortly after the Queen began her investigation, accused of incompetence in managing Treasury affairs, though the true reason, I believe, was that I had helped her gather evidence against Corvin. I was removed before I could learn how the matter concluded." Ilara continued examining the documents, her mind racing through the implications of what she was learning. If these records were accurate, if Corvin truly had been stealing from the kingdom's treasury for years, and if her mother had discovered this theft shortly before her mysterious death, the connection seemed too significant to dismiss as mere coincidence. "There is something else you should know, Princess," Master Alden continued, his expression growing even more troubled. "Bastian, the physician you mentioned, was not simply accused of poisoning a nobleman by chance. The nobleman he was accused of harming, Lord Varnick, had been one of the primary investors in the eastern trade routes that Corvin was manipulating. I believe, though I cannot prove it definitively, that Bastian's accusation was orchestrated deliberately, both to silence Lord Varnick's growing suspicions and to remove a respected physician who might have recognized signs of foul play in future incidents." Ilara felt a chill settle over her entire body as the pieces continued falling into place. "Are you suggesting Lord Varnick's death was not accidental either?" "I cannot say with certainty," Master Alden admitted. "But the timing, the connections, the pattern of convenient deaths and dismissals surrounding anyone who threatened Corvin's growing influence, it all points toward a conclusion too troubling to ignore." Ilara sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight of everything she had learned. The picture forming in her mind was far more disturbing than she had initially imagined, a pattern of corruption and violence stretching back years, carefully hidden beneath layers of official explanations and convenient silences. "I need to take these documents back to the palace," she said finally. "They could provide the evidence needed to finally expose Corvin's crimes." Master Alden's expression grew alarmed. "Princess, please consider carefully what you are proposing. Corvin has spent years building alliances throughout the court, securing loyalty through fear and calculated favors. If you present these documents without sufficient support, without allies willing to stand beside you, he may find ways to discredit the evidence, or worse, to eliminate you before you can act." "What would you suggest instead?" Ilara asked. "Gather more evidence first," Master Alden advised. "These documents alone, while damning, may not be enough to convince your father of Corvin's guilt, particularly given how deeply Corvin has embedded himself within the court's trust. You need additional witnesses, additional proof, enough to build a case so overwhelming that even Corvin's carefully cultivated alliances cannot protect him." Ilara considered his words carefully, recognizing the wisdom in his caution despite her eagerness to act immediately. "Do you know of anyone else who might have information? Anyone who witnessed events during that period who might be willing to speak the truth now?" Master Alden thought carefully before answering. "There was a merchant, Godfrey, who traveled the eastern trade routes during those years. He would have witnessed firsthand how the funds were being diverted, how the official records did not match the actual goods being transported. If he still lives, he might be persuaded to testify, particularly if he understands the Crown's protection would be extended to him in exchange for his honesty." "Where might I find him?" Ilara asked. "He kept a warehouse near the eastern port city of Marrow Bay. "The last I heard," Master Alden said. "Though whether he remains there after all these years, I cannot say with certainty." Ilara nodded slowly, already forming plans for another journey, this time toward the eastern coast. The path toward justice, she realized, would require far more effort and far more courage than she had initially anticipated, but she felt more determined than ever to see it through to its conclusion. "Thank you, Master Alden," she said sincerely, carefully gathering the documents he had provided. "Your courage in preserving this evidence, even after everything you lost, means more than you know." "I only hope it leads to justice, Princess," he replied, his voice heavy with years of suppressed hope. "Justice for your mother, for the physician wrongfully exiled, and for everyone else whose lives were quietly destroyed to protect Corvin's ambitions." As Ilara prepared to leave, Master Alden offered one final warning. "Please, Princess, trust no one at court fully. Not until you understand exactly who remains loyal to the crown and who has been quietly bought by Corvin's growing influence over the years. The rot may run deeper than either of us currently understands." The journey back toward the village center felt different than the journey out had been, weighted now with the knowledge Ilara carried, both in the documents hidden carefully within her travel bag and in the growing certainty forming within her mind. Corvin was responsible, not just for Bastion's wrongful exile, but likely for Lord Varnick's death, and quite possibly for her own mother's mysterious illness as well. As she and Lyra made their way back through the festival crowds toward their waiting guards, Ilara found herself scanning every face they passed, wondering who among the strangers might be watching, might be reporting her movements back to Corvin or his allies. The paranoia felt uncomfortable, foreign to her usual trusting nature, but she recognized the necessity of such caution, given everything she now understood. "Princess," Lyra said quietly as they walked, "what will you do now, with the documents we have gathered?" "I need to find Godfrey," Ilara said, her mind already turning toward the journey ahead. "If his testimony can confirm what these records suggest, combined with everything Bastion has already told us, we may finally have enough evidence to bring before my father." "And if Corvin learns of your investigation before you can gather sufficient proof?" Lyra asked, her voice carrying obvious worry. Ilara did not have a satisfying answer to that question, though the possibility weighed heavily on her thoughts throughout the remainder of their journey back toward the palace. She understood the risks involved, understood that each step forward brought her closer not just to truth, but to danger as well. Yet turning back now, abandoning the pursuit of justice for her mother and for Bastion, felt entirely impossible to consider. The carriage ride back to the palace passed largely in silence, Ilara's mind occupied entirely with plans for the journey to Marrow Bay, with strategies for approaching Godfrey, with careful considerations about who among the court's nobles and officials might be trusted enough to help without risking exposure to Corvin's network of loyal allies. By the time they arrived back at the palace gates, evening had fallen, casting long shadows across the familiar courtyards. Ilara felt exhausted, both physically from the journey and emotionally from everything she had learned. Yet beneath the exhaustion, a fierce determination continued burning steadily within her chest. She made her way immediately to Bastion's chambers, eager to share what she had discovered, though she moved carefully through the palace corridors, mindful now of every servant, every guard, every noble who might be watching her movements with more interest than they revealed openly. Bastion listened intently as she recounted everything Master Alden had shared, his expression growing increasingly grave with each new revelation. When she finished, he sat in thoughtful silence for several long moments before finally speaking. "This confirms much of what I suspected, though the full scope of Corvin's crimes is even more disturbing than I had feared," he said quietly. "Lord Varnick's death, if truly connected to Corvin's theft, suggests a man willing to commit far greater harm than mere financial corruption to protect his ambitions." "I intend to find Godfrey," Ilara said. "If his testimony can provide additional confirmation, combined with these documents, we may finally have enough evidence to expose everything." The journey to Marrow Bay will take considerably longer than your trip north, Bastian cautioned. And the risks involved in seeking out a witness who may hold damaging testimony against Corvin should not be underestimated. If Corvin has spies throughout the kingdom's trade networks, as seems increasingly likely given his position as auction master, word of your inquiries may reach him before you even arrive. Ilara understood the danger clearly, yet felt no less determined to proceed despite the risks involved. I cannot stop now, Bastian, not when we are finally close to understanding the truth, close to finding justice for everything Corvin has taken from so many innocent people. Bastian studied her carefully, something like both pride and deep concern reflected in his tired eyes. Then we must proceed with extreme caution, Princess. Every step forward from this point carries greater risk than the last. We are no longer simply gathering information quietly in the shadows. We are approaching the point where Corvin himself may begin actively working against us, should he discover what we have learned. As night settled fully over the palace, Ilara sat with Bastian, carefully planning the journey ahead toward Marrow Bay, toward Godfrey, and whatever additional truth he might provide. The path toward justice had grown clearer with each new revelation, yet the dangers along that path had grown correspondingly more severe, and Ilara understood, with unwavering clarity, that the most difficult and dangerous portion of her journey still lay ahead. 3 days after returning from the Northern Festival, Ilara found herself preparing for another journey, this time toward the distant eastern port of Marrow Bay. She had spent those days carefully constructing a plausible reason for her absence, eventually settling on a claim that she wished to inspect the kingdom's shipping operations firsthand, part of her growing interest in understanding trade and commerce throughout the realm. Her father had granted permission again, though this time his gaze had lingered on her a moment longer than usual, as though searching for something beneath her carefully composed explanation. Ilara had held his gaze steadily, refusing to let any hint of her true purpose show through her calm exterior. What she had not anticipated was Corvin's sudden appearance the morning of her departure, standing near the palace gates as her carriage was being prepared, his expression carrying a politeness that felt increasingly forced with each passing conversation between them. "Another journey so soon, Princess?" he asked, his tone light, though his eyes remained sharp and watchful. "Your recent travels have certainly kept you quite busy these past weeks." "I find I enjoy learning more about the kingdom beyond palace walls," Ilara replied carefully, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden tension coiling in her stomach. "There is much to understand about how our realm truly functions." "Indeed," Corvin said, stepping closer, his voice dropping slightly. "Though I confess, Princess, I have heard rumors of your recent visit to a certain retired treasury advisor. Master Alden, I believe his name was. Strange company for a princess focused on trade and commerce." Ilara felt her pulse quicken, though she forced herself to maintain a calm expression. "I simply wish to understand more about how the treasury operates. Auction master. Master Alden's experience seemed valuable for such purposes." Corvin's smile did not reach his eyes. "Of course, Princess, though I would caution you against placing too much trust in the words of a man dismissed from court for his own failures. Bitter men often tell stories that flatter their own grievances rather than reflect actual truth." The warning, thinly veiled beneath polite conversation, settled heavily in Ilara's chest. Corvin knew, or at least suspected, far more than she had hoped. Yet she refused to let her composure crack, meeting his gaze directly, despite the fear building steadily within her. "I appreciate your concern, auction master," she said evenly, "but I trust my own judgment in these matters." Something flickered behind Corvin's eyes, cold and calculating, gone as quickly as it appeared behind his practiced mask of politeness. "Of course, Princess. Safe travels on your journey east. I trust you will find whatever it is you are seeking." The double meaning behind his words lingered long after her carriage departed the palace grounds, carrying her steadily eastward toward Marrow Bay. Alara replayed the conversation repeatedly during the journey, growing increasingly certain that Corvin now understood, at least partially, the nature of her investigation. The realization brought a new urgency to her mission, a need to gather whatever evidence remained before Corvin found ways to eliminate it entirely. The journey to Marrow Bay took nearly 4 days, winding through changing landscapes that gradually shifted from rolling farmland to rugged coastal terrain, the air growing salty and cool as they approached the eastern shore. Ilara traveled with a larger guard contingent this time, mindful of Corvin's veiled warning and the increased risks involved in venturing so far from the palace's protection. Marrow Bay itself proved to be a bustling port city, filled with the constant activity of ships loading and unloading goods, merchants haggling over prices, and sailors moving purposefully between taverns and warehouses along the busy waterfront. Ilara found the atmosphere both exciting and overwhelming, so different from the controlled elegance of palace life she had known her entire existence. Locating Godfrey's warehouse proved more challenging than anticipated. Master Alden's information, gathered years earlier, had grown outdated, and several inquiries led to dead ends before Ilara finally learned that Godfrey had retired from active trading several years prior, though he still maintained a small residence near the harbor. She found him eventually, a weathered man with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands, tending a modest garden behind a simple cottage overlooking the busy port below. He looked up with obvious surprise as Ilara approached, quickly recognizing, from her fine traveling clothes and careful bearing, that she was no ordinary visitor. "Can I help you, my lady?" he asked cautiously, setting aside his gardening tools. "I am Princess Ilara," she said carefully, watching his expression shift from surprise to wary uncertainty. "I have traveled from the capital, seeking information about trade practices along the eastern routes. Information that dates back several years." Godfrey's weathered face grew guarded. "That is a long time ago, Princess. My memory of those days has grown hazy with age." "I believe you witnessed irregularities in the trade agreements," Ilara pressed gently. "Discrepancies related to funds being diverted from official shipments. Funds connected to a man who now holds significant power at court." Godfrey's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of old fear passing across his features. "Princess, I do not know what you have heard, but I am simply a retired merchant, living quietly, wishing to cause no trouble for anyone." "Please," Ilara said, her voice softening with genuine understanding. "I know this is a difficult subject, and I understand your caution, but I believe the man responsible for that corruption may have also been responsible for my mother's death, and for the wrongful exile of an innocent physician. I need your help to finally bring justice to those who have suffered because of his ambitions." Godfrey studied her carefully for a long moment, something shifting behind his weathered eyes. Finally, he sighed heavily, gesturing toward 2 simple chairs near his cottage door. "Perhaps you should sit, Princess. This is not a conversation meant for casual discussion in the open." Once settled, Godfrey began speaking slowly, his voice carrying the weight of memories long suppressed. "I worked the eastern trade routes for many years, transporting goods between Marrow Bay and various inland cities. During that time, I noticed discrepancies in the official manifests, goods listed as shipped that never actually appeared in the recorded quantities, funds allocated for trade that seemed to vanish before reaching their intended destinations." "Did you report these discrepancies?" Ilara asked. Godfrey's expression grew troubled. "I tried, Princess, though quietly, careful not to draw too much attention. I spoke with a treasury official, a man named Alden, who seemed genuinely concerned about what I had witnessed. But shortly after our conversation, strange things began happening. My shipments faced unexplained delays, my contracts mysteriously fell through, and eventually I received a clear warning, delivered by men I did not recognize, suggesting I should abandon my inquiries entirely if I valued my continued livelihood." "Who sent these men?" Ilara asked, though she already suspected the answer. "I never learned their names," Godfrey admitted, But the message they carried made clear who had sent them. A man rising quickly in influence and wealth, a man who controlled much of the trade moving through this region during those years. "Corvin," Ilara said quietly. Godfrey nodded slowly. "I never spoke his name aloud after that warning, Princess. Not until this very moment. I retired from active trading not long afterward, choosing a quieter life rather than risk further confrontation with a man growing increasingly powerful and dangerous." Ilara felt a mixture of vindication and growing horror at Godfrey's confirmation of everything she had already suspected. The pattern was undeniable now. Corruption, threats, and silence enforced through fear, all connected to Corvin's steady rise toward power. "Would you be willing to testify to what you have witnessed?" Ilara asked carefully. "Before my father, before the court, if it meant finally bringing justice to those who suffered because of Corvin's actions." Godfrey hesitated, old fear clearly still lingering beneath his weathered exterior. "Princess, testifying against a man as powerful as Corvin carries tremendous risk, even now, even after all these years." "I understand your hesitation," Ilara said gently, "but I promise you, whatever protection the crown can offer, I will ensure you receive it. Your testimony, combined with documents I have already gathered and testimony from others who suffered similarly, could finally bring an end to Corvin's corruption." Godfrey studied her for a long moment, weighing the risks carefully in his mind. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Very well, Princess. I have carried this burden of silence for far too long. If there is a chance to finally see justice served, I am willing to take that risk." Relief flooded through Ilara at his agreement, though she understood the danger had not lessened despite gaining another crucial witness. "Thank you, Godfrey. Your courage means more than you know." As they continued discussing the details of his eventual testimony, Ilara noticed a shadow passing briefly across the garden, gone before she could clearly identify its source. A chill of unease settled over her, though she pushed the feeling aside, attributing it perhaps to nervous imagination given the tense nature of their conversation. However, that evening, as Ilara and her guards prepared to depart Marrow Bay, one of her most trusted guards approached with an urgent expression, drawing her aside from the others. "Princess," he said quietly, "I believe we are being watched. I noticed several men following our movements throughout the day, careful to remain at a distance but clearly monitoring our activities." Ilara's heart raced at the confirmation of her earlier unease. "Do you recognize them?" "No, Princess," the guard admitted. "But their behavior suggests they are not simply curious townspeople. They move with purpose, communicating through subtle signals when they believe themselves unobserved." The confirmation that Corvin's suspicions had likely extended into active surveillance sent a fresh wave of fear through Ilara's chest. If he knew about her visit to Godfrey, if he understood the growing threat her investigation posed to his position, he would undoubtedly take more direct action to protect himself. "We need to leave immediately," Ilara decided. "And we need to ensure Godfrey receives protection as well, in case Corvin attempts to silence him before he can testify." The guard nodded grimly, already moving to arrange additional security measures both for their departure and for Godfrey's continued safety. Ilara returned briefly to Godfrey's cottage, warning him of the potential danger and arranging for a small contingent of guards to remain nearby, disguised as ordinary travelers to avoid drawing further suspicion. "Please be careful, Princess," Godfrey urged as she prepared to leave. "Corvin has proven himself capable of great harm to protect his secrets. Do not underestimate the danger you now face." "I understand," Ilara said, though the words felt inadequate given the growing sense of dread building within her chest. "Thank you again, Godfrey, for your courage in finally speaking the truth." The journey back toward the palace felt tense and dangerous in ways her earlier travels had not, every shadow along the road seeming to hold potential threat, every stranger encountered along the way examined carefully for signs of hostile intent. Ilara found herself constantly glancing behind, watching for any indication that Corvin's men continued following their movements. By the time they finally arrived back within the palace's protective walls, exhaustion and lingering fear had left Elara feeling drained, though her resolve remained as strong as ever. She had gathered crucial evidence, secured a willing witness, and confirmed beyond doubt the depth of Corvin's corruption. Yet the danger surrounding her investigation had grown correspondingly more severe, and she understood clearly that the coming days would require even greater caution than before. She made her way immediately to Bastian's chambers, eager to share what she had learned despite her exhaustion, understanding the urgency of preparing their next steps before Corvin could act against them further. Bastian listened intently as she recounted everything, his expression growing increasingly grave throughout her explanation. When she finished, describing the surveillance they had noticed during their departure from Marrow Bay, his concern deepened visibly. "This confirms my worst fears, Princess," he said quietly. "Corvin now understands the threat you pose, and men in his position rarely hesitate to eliminate such threats through whatever means necessary." "What should we do?" Elara asked, feeling suddenly uncertain despite everything they had accomplished. Bastian considered carefully before responding. "We must move quickly now, Princess. Gather whatever additional allies we can trust, and prepare to present our evidence before your father as soon as possible. The longer we wait, the greater opportunity Corvin has to either destroy our evidence or eliminate our witnesses entirely." Elara nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in his urgency, despite the fear building steadily within her chest. The path toward justice had grown increasingly dangerous, yet she remained as determined as ever to see it through to its conclusion, whatever risks that determination might ultimately require her to face. Sleep did not come easily that night. Elara lay awake in her chambers, staring at the ceiling while her mind turned over every detail of the journey to Marrow Bay, every warning Godfrey had offered, every calculating glance Corvin had cast her way before her departure. She understood now that time was working against her, that each passing day gave Corvin further opportunity to discover the full extent of what she had learned, and to take whatever action he deemed necessary to protect himself. Before dawn broke fully over the palace, Elara rose and dressed quickly, determined to speak with Bastian again before beginning the difficult work of identifying which allies within the court might be trusted enough to help present their case to her father. She found him already awake, seated near his window, as had become his habit, watching the gardens slowly brighten with the coming sunrise. "You did not sleep either," she observed, settling into her usual chair across from him. "Old habits," Bastian replied with a faint, tired smile. "Years of uncertainty taught me to remain alert even when rest was available, though I confess this particular night carried more weight than most." "We need allies," Elara said, moving directly to the matter weighing most heavily on her mind. "People within the court who can help us present our evidence effectively, who carry enough influence and trust that Corvin cannot easily dismiss their support." Bastian nodded slowly, considering the question carefully. "There are a few individuals who come to mind, though identifying truly trustworthy allies within a court so thoroughly infiltrated by Corvin's influence will require considerable caution." "Who would you suggest?" Elara asked. "General Marrow," Bastian said after a moment's thought. "He commands significant respect among the military and has always struck me, from what I observed during my years at court, as a man who values honor above political convenience. If he can be convinced of Corvin's corruption, his support could prove invaluable, particularly given his influence over palace security." Elara considered the suggestion carefully. She had met General Marrow on several occasions during formal court functions, finding him to be a serious, disciplined man who rarely engaged in the political games so common among other nobles. "I believe I can approach him," she said, "though I will need to choose my words carefully, ensuring he understands the seriousness of what we have uncovered, without revealing so much that word might inadvertently reach Corvin before we are ready to act. There is also Lady Wren," Bastian continued. "She serves as an advisor on trade matters, and I recall she expressed skepticism about Corvin's rapid rise to power during my final months at court, before my exile began." If she remains skeptical of him now, her insight into the trade practices he oversees could provide additional confirmation of the corruption we have already documented. Ilara made careful mental notes of both names, already forming plans for how she might approach each potential ally without arousing suspicion. The task ahead felt daunting, requiring a delicate balance between gathering necessary support and maintaining enough secrecy to avoid alerting Corvin before they were fully prepared to confront him. Over the following days, Ilara moved carefully through the palace, seeking opportunities to speak privately with General Marrow and Lady Wren without drawing obvious attention to her intentions. She found her chance with General Marrow during a routine training exercise held in the palace courtyard, approaching him afterward under the guise of expressing interest in the kingdom's military preparedness. "General," she said, falling into step beside him as he walked toward the armory, "I wonder if I might speak with you privately regarding a matter of some importance." General Marrow glanced at her with obvious curiosity, though his expression remained carefully neutral. "Of course, Princess. What matter concerns you?" Ilara chose her words carefully, mindful of the guards and servants moving throughout the courtyard who might overhear their conversation. "It concerns certain irregularities I have discovered within the kingdom's treasury records, irregularities that may connect to more serious crimes committed against the crown." General Marrow's expression sharpened with sudden interest, his casual demeanor shifting into something more focused and alert. "That sounds like a serious accusation, Princess. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." They moved together toward a quiet corner of the armory, away from the ears of passing servants and guards. There, Ilara explained carefully everything she had discovered, from Bastion's wrongful exile to the documents provided by Master Alden, to Godfrey's testimony confirming years of systematic theft and intimidation connected directly to Corvin. General Marrow listened with growing intensity, his expression darkening progressively as the full scope of the corruption became clear. When Ilara finished, he remained silent for several long moments, processing the weight of everything she had shared. "This is deeply troubling, Princess," he said finally. "I have long harbored certain suspicions about Corvin, though I never possessed concrete evidence to support those concerns. If everything you have described proves accurate, the implications extend far beyond simple financial corruption." "Will you help us?" Ilara asked directly. "We need allies within the court, individuals with enough influence and credibility to help present this evidence convincingly before my father." General Marrow considered the question seriously before responding. "You have my support, Princess. Corruption of this magnitude cannot be allowed to continue unchecked, particularly if it truly connects to your mother's death and to the wrongful punishment of an innocent physician. I will help however I can, though we must proceed carefully. Corvin's influence extends further than most realize, and moving too hastily could result in the evidence being destroyed or witnesses being silenced before justice can be properly served." Relief flooded through Ilara at gaining such a powerful and respected ally. "Thank you, General. Your support means a great deal." "What is our next step?" General Marrow asked. "I intend to speak with Lady Wren as well," Ilara said. "Bastion believes her insight into trade practices could provide additional confirmation of the corruption we have already documented. Once we have gathered sufficient allies and evidence, we will need to determine the safest way to present everything before my father, ensuring Corvin cannot find opportunity to interfere or discredit our findings." General Marrow nodded thoughtfully. "I will begin quietly reviewing palace security arrangements, ensuring we have reliable guards positioned appropriately when the time comes to confront Corvin directly. It would be unwise to underestimate what measures he might take once he realizes his position is genuinely threatened." Their conversation concluded with careful plans for maintaining regular but discreet communication, ensuring they could coordinate effectively without drawing unwanted attention to their growing alliance. Ilara left the armory feeling encouraged by General Marrow's support, though the weight of the task ahead remained heavy upon her shoulders. Finding an opportunity to speak with Lady Wren proved slightly more challenging, though Alara eventually managed to arrange a private meeting under the pretense of seeking advice regarding trade matters relevant to the northern regions she had recently visited. Lady Wren, an elegant woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, welcomed Alara into her private study with evident curiosity. "Princess Alara," she said, gesturing toward a comfortable chair near her desk. "I confess, I was surprised to receive your request for a private audience. How might I assist you?" Alara approached the conversation carefully, gradually steering the discussion toward broader questions about the kingdom's trade practices before finally revealing the true purpose of her visit. As with General Marrow, she explained the evidence she had gathered, watching Lady Wren's expression shift from polite interest to genuine alarm as the full scope of Corvin's corruption became apparent. "I suspected something was amiss for years," Lady Wren admitted once Alara finished her explanation. "The trade reports Corvin submitted never quite matched the actual volume of goods moving through the eastern routes, though I could never prove definitively that discrepancies existed rather than simply reflecting the natural complexity of large-scale trade operations. This evidence you have gathered, however, removes any doubt. Will you help us?" Alara asked, echoing the same request she had made to General Marrow. Lady Wren nodded firmly. "Absolutely, Princess. I have long felt uneasy about Corvin's rapid accumulation of wealth and influence, though I lacked sufficient courage or evidence to challenge him directly. With your evidence and General Marrow's support, I believe we finally possess what is needed to expose his crimes properly." With both General Marrow and Lady Wren now committed to supporting her investigation, Alara felt a growing sense of momentum building toward the eventual confrontation with Corvin. Yet even as her circle of trusted allies expanded, she remained acutely aware of the increasing danger surrounding their efforts. That evening, as she reviewed their progress with Bastion, sharing details of her conversations with both General Marrow and Lady Wren, a soft knock interrupted their discussion. Lyra entered, her expression tense with obvious worry. "Princess," she said quickly, "I have received troubling news." One of the kitchen staff mentioned overhearing a conversation between Corvin and one of his personal guards, discussing increased security measures around his private quarters and warehouse holdings. It seems he has grown suspicious that something is being planned against him. Alara's heart raced at the news. Did they mention anything specific about what he suspects, or who he believes might be involved? Lyra shook her head. "Nothing specific was overheard, Princess, only vague mentions of increased caution and a warning to his guards to watch for unusual activity among the court's nobility." Bastion's expression grew increasingly grave as he considered the implications. "This suggests Corvin's suspicions have grown significantly, likely triggered by your journey to Marrow Bay and whatever surveillance his men reported afterward. We may have less time than we initially hoped to gather our remaining evidence and present our case." "What should we do?" Alara asked, feeling the familiar tension of urgency building within her chest. "We must accelerate our timeline," Bastion said firmly. "Rather than continuing to gather additional witnesses or evidence, we should focus on preparing to present what we already possess before your father as soon as possible, before Corvin has opportunity to take more drastic action to protect himself." Alara nodded, understanding the wisdom in his suggestion despite the fear building steadily within her at the thought of confronting Corvin so directly and so soon. "I will speak with General Marrow and Lady Wren tomorrow, arranging plans for how best to present our evidence before my father, in a manner that ensures Corvin cannot easily discredit our claims or escape justice through his usual political manipulations." As the conversation concluded and Alara prepared to retire for the evening, a heavy sense of foreboding settled over her, different from the determined resolve that had carried her through the previous weeks of careful investigation. She understood now that the confrontation with Corvin was approaching rapidly and that the coming days would likely determine not just the success of her investigation, but potentially the safety of everyone involved in bringing his crimes to light. That night, as she lay in her bed trying unsuccessfully to find rest, Ilara found herself thinking of her mother, wondering if she had felt similar fear during her own investigation into Corvin's corruption, wondering if she had understood, in her final days, the true danger she faced from a man skilled at hiding his true nature behind a carefully constructed mask of charm and loyalty. Whatever fear lingered within her, Ilara refused to let it overcome her determination. She had come too far now, gathered too much evidence, and secured too many important allies to abandon her pursuit of justice, regardless of the dangers that continued mounting with each passing day. Tomorrow, she would begin the final preparations needed to confront Corvin directly, whatever the outcome might ultimately prove to be. The following morning brought unwelcome news that shattered whatever fragile sense of control Ilara had believed she still possessed. Lyra arrived at her chambers before the sun had fully risen, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly as she delivered the message. "Princess, I have just received word from Marrow Bay," she said, her voice unsteady. "Godfrey's cottage was set ablaze last night. The guards you left to protect him managed to pull him from the flames, though he suffered injuries and remains in critical condition." Ilara felt the blood drain from her face, horror and guilt washing over her in equal measure. "Is he expected to recover?" "The healers are uncertain, Princess," Lyra admitted. "But this cannot be coincidence. Someone learned of his willingness to testify and moved to silence him before he could speak the truth." Ilara sank onto the edge of her bed, the weight of the news pressing heavily against her chest. She had promised Godfrey protection, had assured him that coming forward with his testimony would not cost him his safety, and now that promise felt hollow and broken. Corvin's reach extended further than she had feared, his willingness to cause harm now proven beyond any remaining doubt. She dressed quickly and made her way immediately to Bastian's chambers, finding him already aware of the troubling news, his expression grim and troubled. "This changes everything," Bastian said as she entered. "Corvin has moved from mere suspicion to direct action. He knows, or strongly suspects, exactly what we have been gathering against him, and he is no longer content to simply watch and wait." "We need to act immediately," Ilara said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. "Before he can move against any of our other witnesses, before he can destroy the remaining evidence we have gathered." Bastian nodded slowly. "I agree, Princess. But we must also consider that Godfrey's testimony, while valuable, is no longer immediately available given his current condition. We will need to present what evidence we have already secured, combined with the support of General Marrow and Lady Wren, and hope it proves sufficient to convince your father of the danger Corvin represents." Within the hour, Ilara had summoned both General Marrow and Lady Wren to a private meeting within Bastian's chambers, the small room now serving as an unlikely command center for their carefully orchestrated plan. She explained the news from Marrow Bay, watching both allies absorb the implications with visible concern. "This confirms the severity of the threat we face," General Marrow said grimly. "Corvin has demonstrated a clear willingness to harm anyone who threatens his position. We cannot delay further in bringing this matter before the king." "I agree," Lady Wren added, "though we must consider carefully how to present our case. Corvin remains a trusted advisor within the court, and accusing him of such serious crimes without absolute certainty of the king's protection could place all of us in considerable danger." They spent the following hours carefully constructing their strategy, organizing the documents Master Alden had provided, preparing testimony from Bastian regarding his wrongful exile, and planning exactly how they would present the evidence before King Aldrich in a manner that left no room for Corvin to escape accountability through clever manipulation or political maneuvering. "We should request a private audience with the king," General Marrow suggested, "rather than a public confrontation, which would give Corvin opportunity to defend himself before he has been properly cornered by irrefutable evidence." "I will arrange it," Ilara said, determination steadying her voice, despite the fear still lingering beneath her resolve. My father will grant me a private audience without hesitation. That afternoon, Ilara requested precisely such an audience, and her father agreed readily, curious about the sudden formality of her request. She arrived at his private study that evening, accompanied by Bastien, General Marrow, and Lady Wren, each carrying documents and prepared testimony that would together form an undeniable case against Corvin's years of hidden corruption. King Aldric's expression shifted from mild curiosity to genuine alarm as Ilara began explaining the purpose of their visit, growing increasingly troubled as she laid out the evidence piece by piece. Bastien spoke of his wrongful exile, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of revisiting such painful memories. General Marrow confirmed his own long-standing suspicions regarding Corvin's rapid rise to power. Lady Wren detailed the irregularities she had observed in trade reports over the years, irregularities that now made perfect sense given the documented evidence of theft. And Godfrey's testimony, Ilara continued, her voice tightening with barely controlled emotion, though he cannot speak for himself at present, given that his cottage was deliberately set ablaze last night in an apparent attempt to silence him before he could confirm what he witnessed regarding Corvin's manipulation of the eastern trade routes. King Aldric sat in stunned silence for several long moments, absorbing the full weight of everything presented before him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a heaviness Ilara had rarely heard from her father. This connects to your mother's death as well, does it not? The illness that claimed her, so sudden and unexplained. I believe so, father, Ilara said gently. Mother discovered evidence of Corvin's theft shortly before her illness began. The timing, combined with everything we have since uncovered, suggests her death may not have been natural at all. The king's expression crumpled briefly, years of carefully suppressed grief threatening to surface before he steadied himself through sheer force of will. I always harbored doubts, he admitted quietly. The healers seemed genuinely puzzled by her symptoms, yet I chose to accept their official explanation rather than pursue questions that felt too painful to face directly. We understand, father, Ilara said softly, but we cannot allow that pain to prevent justice from finally being served, both for mother and for everyone else who has suffered because of Corvin's ambitions. King Aldric nodded slowly, his expression hardening with newfound resolve. You are right, Ilara. This corruption must be addressed immediately and decisively. I will summon Corvin before the full court tomorrow morning, where he will be formally confronted with this evidence. Father, Ilara said carefully, I worry that confronting him publicly before we have secured absolute protection against his potential retaliation might give him opportunity to flee or to cause further harm before justice can be properly administered. The king considered her concern seriously. You suggest we should arrest him quietly first, before any public confrontation. I believe that would be wisest, General Marrow interjected. With your Majesty's permission, I can arrange for Corvin's arrest tonight, ensuring he has no opportunity to destroy remaining evidence or flee the kingdom before facing formal charges. King Aldric nodded firmly, his decision made. Very well. General Marrow, you have my authority to arrest Corvin immediately, using whatever force necessary to ensure his safe custody without allowing him opportunity to escape or cause further harm. As General Marrow departed to organize the arrest, Ilara felt a complex mixture of relief and lingering anxiety settling over her. They were close now, closer than she had ever imagined possible when she first pointed toward Bastien in that crowded auction hall weeks earlier. Yet she understood that Corvin, cornered and desperate, might prove even more dangerous than he had been while operating freely under the cover of trusted respectability. The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness as they awaited news of General Marrow's mission. Ilara remained in her father's study alongside Bastien and Lady Wren, unable to focus on anything beyond anxious anticipation of what news might eventually arrive. Finally, well past midnight, a guard arrived bearing troubling information that immediately shattered whatever fragile calm had settled over the room. Your Majesty, the guard said breathlessly, General Marrow's men arrived at Corvin's private quarters to find them empty. It appears he was warned of our intentions and fled the palace grounds sometime earlier this evening. King Aldric's expression darkened with fury and frustration. How could he have known? We only decided upon this course of action mere hours ago. Ilara felt a cold chill settle over her entire body as a troubling realization dawned. Someone within our circle must have alerted him, she said quietly. Someone who learned of our plans and chose to warn Corvin rather than support our efforts toward justice. The room fell into tense silence as everyone present considered the implications of such a betrayal. Bastion's expression grew particularly troubled, his eyes moving carefully around the room as though searching for some hidden sign of deception among those he had trusted throughout this dangerous investigation. We must find him before he can cause further harm or escape the kingdom entirely, King Aldric declared firmly. General Marrow, expand the search immediately. Check every gate, every road leading from the capital. Corvin cannot be allowed to escape justice, not after everything he has done. As guards were dispatched throughout the palace and surrounding city, searching desperately for any sign of Corvin's whereabouts, Ilara found herself grappling with the unsettling possibility that someone close to her, someone she had trusted enough to include in this dangerous investigation, had ultimately chosen loyalty to Corvin over loyalty to justice and truth. The night stretched onward, filled with anxious waiting and growing uncertainty about what dangers might still lie ahead. Ilara understood now that their careful plans had been compromised, that Corvin, forewarned and desperate, might prove even more dangerous than before as he fought to protect himself from the justice finally closing in around him. Dawn broke over the palace with no sign of Corvin's capture, and the mood throughout the royal household had shifted into something tense and watchful. Guards patrolled the corridors with heightened alertness, and King Aldric had ordered every gate leading from the capital carefully monitored, though Ilara understood that a man as resourceful as Corvin, with years of hidden wealth and secret alliances at his disposal, would not be easily found if he wished to remain hidden. Ilara sat with Bastion in his chambers as the morning light filtered through the window, both of them exhausted from the sleepless night that had passed since learning of Corvin's escape. The question of who had betrayed their plans continued weighing heavily on her mind, an unwelcome puzzle that demanded resolution before they could move forward with any confidence. I keep returning to the same question, Ilara said, breaking the heavy silence between them. Who among those present in my father's study last night could have possibly warned Corvin in time for him to escape before General Marrow's men arrived? Bastion considered the question carefully, his expression thoughtful despite obvious exhaustion. The timeline is troubling, Princess. Very little time passed between your father's decision and General Marrow's departure to arrange the arrest. Whoever warned Corvin must have acted with remarkable speed, suggesting either a very close relationship with him or perhaps someone who anticipated this outcome before it was even formally decided. Lady Wren remained with us the entire time, Ilara said slowly, thinking through the sequence of events. General Marrow left immediately to organize the arrest. Could someone within his own ranks have been the one to warn Corvin? Bastion's eyes widened slightly at the suggestion. That is possible, Princess, though it raises troubling questions about how deeply Corvin's influence has penetrated even the palace guard, an institution meant to be entirely loyal to the crown. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. Lyra entered, her expression a mixture of relief and continued worry. Princess, General Marrow requests your presence immediately. There has been a development. Ilara hurried alongside Lyra toward the palace's main hall, finding General Marrow waiting with a grim expression, along with two guards who held between them a young soldier, his hands bound, his face pale with obvious fear. Princess, General Marrow said as she approached, we have identified the one who warned Corvin of our plans. This soldier, one of my own men, was observed leaving the palace grounds shortly after your father's decision was made, moving with unusual haste toward the merchant district where Corvin maintains several properties. The young soldier remained silent, his eyes downcast, though his trembling hands betrayed his fear at being discovered. "Why did you do it?" Ilara asked directly, moving closer to study his frightened expression. "What did Corvin offer you in exchange for such betrayal?" The soldier remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "My family, Princess. Corvin has controlled significant debts owed by my father for years, debts that could destroy everything my family has worked to build. When he learned, through unknown means, that your investigation was progressing toward his exposure, he approached me directly, threatening to call in those debts immediately, ruining my family entirely, unless I agreed to warn him should any direct action be taken against him." Ilara felt a complicated mixture of anger and reluctant sympathy at the soldier's explanation. Corvin's corruption, it seemed, extended far beyond simple financial theft, reaching into the lives of ordinary people through calculated manipulation and threats against their families. "Where did you warn him to go?" General Marrow demanded. "We need to know where he might be hiding." The soldier hesitated before answering. "He mentioned a property near the western border, Princess, a hidden estate he maintains under a false name, meant to serve as refuge should his position at court ever become compromised." "Can you lead us there?" Ilara asked immediately. The soldier nodded slowly, though his expression remained fearful. "I can, Princess, though I do not know exactly how heavily guarded the property might be, or what preparations Corvin has made in the time since I warned him." General Marrow turned toward Ilara, his expression calculating as he considered their options. "Princess, this could be our best opportunity to capture Corvin before he manages to flee the kingdom entirely. But moving quickly means organizing a mission without the careful preparation we would normally prefer." "We cannot afford further delay," Ilara said firmly. "Every hour that passes gives Corvin greater opportunity to disappear completely, potentially destroying any remaining evidence of his crimes in the process." King Aldrich, who had arrived during their conversation, listened carefully before speaking with quiet authority. "General Marrow, organize a mission immediately. Take whatever guards you deem necessary, but move with haste. I want Corvin captured and brought before proper justice, whatever it takes to accomplish that goal." "I wish to accompany the mission," Ilara said suddenly, surprising even herself with the boldness of her request. Her father's expression immediately filled with concern. "Ilara, this could prove extremely dangerous. Corvin has already demonstrated willingness to cause serious harm to protect himself. I cannot risk your safety in such a perilous situation." "Father," Ilara said firmly, meeting his gaze directly, "I have come too far in this investigation to remain safely behind palace walls while others face the danger I helped uncover. This began with my choice at the auction, continued through my own investigation and travels, and I believe I owe it to Mother, to Bastion, to everyone who has suffered because of Corvin's corruption, to see this through to its conclusion." King Aldrich studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between his instinct to protect his only remaining child and his growing recognition of the strength and determination she had demonstrated throughout this entire ordeal. Finally, he nodded slowly, though his expression remained heavy with worry. "Very well, Ilara, but you will remain under General Marrow's protection at all times, and you will follow his instructions without hesitation should danger arise." "I promise, Father," Ilara said, relief and renewed determination flooding through her at his reluctant agreement. Within hours, a carefully organized group of guards, led by General Marrow and accompanied by Ilara, Bastion, and the young soldier serving as their guide, departed the palace grounds, moving quickly toward the western border where Corvin's hidden estate supposedly waited. Bastion had insisted on accompanying them despite his frailty, arguing that his first-hand knowledge of Corvin's methods and manipulations might prove valuable during whatever confrontation eventually occurred. The journey passed with tense urgency, every member of their group alert for any sign of ambush or unexpected danger along the way. Ilara found herself constantly scanning the surrounding landscape, her earlier fear now tempered by a fierce determination to see this mission through to its necessary conclusion. As they approached the western border regions, the landscape grew increasingly rugged, rocky hills replacing the gentler farmland closer to the capital. The soldier who served as their guide grew visibly nervous as they neared their destination, his hands trembling slightly despite General Marrow's reassurances regarding his safety. "The estate should be just beyond this ridge," the soldier finally said, pointing toward a distant hillside, partially obscured by scattered trees. Corvin maintained it quietly for years, using it primarily as a discreet location for meetings he wished to keep hidden from court observation. General Marrow called for the group to halt, carefully organizing their approach to minimize the risk of alerting anyone who might be watching for signs of pursuit. "We will approach carefully, using the natural cover provided by these trees. I want no unnecessary risks taken until we have confirmed exactly what awaits us at this property." As they moved forward cautiously, Ilara felt her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. After weeks of careful investigation, of gathering evidence and building alliances, of facing threats and setbacks along the way, they were finally approaching what might prove to be the final confrontation with the man responsible for so much suffering and corruption throughout the kingdom. Whatever awaited them at Corvin's hidden estate, Ilara understood that the coming hours would likely determine not just the success of her long investigation, but potentially the safety and well-being of everyone who had risked so much to support her pursuit of truth and justice. The estate came into view as they crested the final ridge, a modest but well-constructed house surrounded by a low wall, smoke rising faintly from one of its chimneys, suggesting recent occupation. General Marrow raised a hand, signaling for the group to halt once more while he studied the property carefully, searching for any visible signs of guards or defensive preparations. "I see movement near the eastern wall," he said quietly, pointing toward a section of the property where two figures could be seen patrolling slowly along the perimeter. "Likely hired guards, though I cannot determine their numbers from this distance." Ilara felt her pulse quicken as she studied the estate, wondering if Corvin himself remained inside, perhaps already aware of their approach, perhaps preparing some final desperate action to protect himself from the justice closing in around him. "How do you wish to proceed?" Ilara asked, turning toward General Marrow. "We will split into two groups," he decided after careful consideration. "One group will approach from the western side, drawing attention away from the main entrance, while the second group, which I will lead personally, moves directly toward the house itself. Princess, you and Bastion will remain here with a small escort until we have secured the property and confirmed it is safe for you to approach." Ilara wanted to protest, wanted to insist on being present for whatever confrontation might occur inside, but she recognized the wisdom in General Marrow's caution, particularly given her father's earlier concerns about her safety. "Very well," she agreed reluctantly. "But please, bring Corvin to justice, whatever it requires." As General Marrow organized his men into the two planned groups, Ilara watched with growing anxiety as they began their careful approach toward the estate below. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness, each moment stretching seemingly endless as she waited for any indication of what might be unfolding beyond her current vantage point. Suddenly, the sound of shouting erupted from the direction of the estate, followed quickly by the unmistakable clash of steel against steel. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat as she strained to see what was happening, though the distance and scattered trees obscured much of the direct action from her view. "Princess, please remain here," urged the guard assigned to watch over her and Bastion. "General Marrow gave clear instructions regarding your safety." But Ilara found herself unable to remain passively waiting while chaos unfolded below, the culmination of weeks of dangerous investigation now playing out just beyond her sight. Against the guard's protests, she moved carefully forward, seeking a better vantage point from which to observe the unfolding confrontation. From her new position, partially concealed behind a cluster of trees, she could see General Marrow's group engaged in fierce combat with several guards near the estate's main entrance, while the second group had apparently succeeded in breaching the western wall, moving quickly toward the house itself. The sounds of conflict echoed sharply through the surrounding hills, a stark contrast to the quiet countryside that had surrounded their approach only minutes before. Then, through the chaos, Ilara spotted a familiar figure emerging from a side entrance of the house, moving quickly toward what appeared to be a small stable positioned near the estate's rear boundary. Corvin, dressed simply rather than in his usual elaborate court attire, moved with obvious urgency, clearly attempting to escape, while his hired guards provided a desperate distraction. "He's trying to flee," Ilara said urgently to the guard beside her. "Through the stable, toward the rear of the property." The guard hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to protect the princess and the need to alert General Marrow to Corvin's attempted escape. Finally, he made his decision. "Princess, please stay hidden here. I will alert the general immediately." As the guard hurried away to relay the crucial information, Ilara found herself alone with Bastian, both watching anxiously as the confrontation continued unfolding below. She could see Corvin reaching the stable, disappearing briefly inside before emerging moments later, mounted on a swift-looking horse, clearly intent on escaping before General Marrow's men could intercept him. "We cannot let him escape," Ilara said, her voice tight with desperate urgency. "Not after everything we have sacrificed to bring him to justice." Before Bastian could respond or attempt to stop her, Ilara moved quickly from their hiding place, running toward a position that might intercept Corvin's escape route, though she carried no weapon and possessed no clear plan beyond a desperate need to prevent his flight. "Princess, wait." Bastian called after her, though his frail condition prevented him from following quickly enough to catch her determined pace. Ilara reached a narrow section of the path leading away from the estate just as Corvin's horse approached, thundering along the rough terrain with obvious desperation propelling its rider forward. For a brief, terrifying moment, their eyes met, Corvin's expression shifting from focused determination to stunned recognition as he realized who stood before him. "Princess Ilara," he said, pulling his horse to a sudden stop, mere feet away from where she stood, his breathing heavy with exertion and barely controlled panic. "You should not be here." "It's over, Corvin," Ilara said, her voice steadier than she felt internally, adrenaline and fear mixing uncomfortably within her chest. "We know everything. The theft, Bastian's wrongful exile, Lord Varnick's death, and my mother's illness. There is nowhere left for you to hide." Corvin's expression cycled rapidly through several emotions, fear giving way to something colder and more calculating as he studied the princess standing alone before him. "You have caused me considerable trouble, princess, more than I ever anticipated when you made your unusual choice at that auction weeks ago." "You murdered my mother," Ilara said, her voice trembling now with barely controlled rage. "You destroyed Bastian's life, and Lord Varnick's, all to protect your own greed and ambition." "Your mother discovered things she should never have pursued," Corvin said, his voice carrying a cold detachment that sent chills through Ilara's entire body. "I offered her the chance to remain silent, to accept a generous arrangement that would have benefited everyone involved. She refused, insisting on exposing what she considered corruption, without understanding the complex realities of maintaining a kingdom's economic stability. "You poisoned her," Ilara said, the confirmation she had feared now spoken aloud for the first time. Corvin's silence confirmed everything she needed to know, his expression neither denying nor explicitly admitting the accusation, though the cold calculation in his eyes left little room for doubt. "Step aside, princess," he said finally, his voice carrying a subtle threat beneath its outward calm. "I have no wish to cause you harm, but I will not allow anyone, not even royalty, to prevent my escape at this point." "I cannot let you leave," Ilara said firmly, standing her ground, despite every instinct urging her to step aside from the obvious danger before her. "Too many people have suffered because of your actions. This ends now." For a tense moment, neither moved, the standoff stretching with dangerous uncertainty as Corvin considered his limited options. Then, from behind Elara, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced General Marrow's arrival, having finally been alerted to Corvin's attempted escape route. Corvin's expression hardened with sudden desperation as he realized his window for peaceful negotiation or intimidation had closed entirely. Without warning, he spurred his horse forward, apparently intending to simply ride past Elara despite the obvious risk of causing her serious harm in the process. Elara's heart seized with terror as the horse charged toward her, though her body remained frozen momentarily, unable to process quickly enough the danger bearing down upon her. Just as the horse drew dangerously close, strong arms suddenly pulled her aside, out of the animal's direct path, as General Marrow's timely arrival prevented what could have proven a devastating collision. "Princess, are you harmed?" General Marrow asked urgently, still gripping her shoulders protectively as Corvin's horse thundered past, continuing its desperate flight toward the surrounding hills. "I am unharmed," Elara managed, though her voice trembled with the aftermath of genuine fear. "But Corvin, he's getting away." General Marrow's expression hardened with grim determination. "Not for long, Princess. My men have already begun pursuit from multiple directions. He will not escape justice, not after everything we have sacrificed to bring him to this reckoning." True to General Marrow's words, shouts soon echoed from further along the path, indicating that additional guards had successfully intercepted Corvin's desperate flight. Elara and General Marrow hurried toward the commotion, finding several guards surrounding Corvin, who had been forcibly pulled from his horse and now knelt on the ground, his hands bound securely behind his back. His usual polished composure had crumbled entirely, replaced by an expression of bitter defeat as he realized the full weight of his eventual capture. As Elara approached, he looked up at her, something almost like grudging respect flickering briefly behind his defeated eyes. "You proved more capable than I ever anticipated, Princess," he said quietly. "I underestimated you entirely, a mistake I now recognize will cost me everything." "Justice will finally be served," Elara said firmly, though relief and lingering emotional exhaustion made her voice tremble slightly despite her attempts at composure. "For my mother, for Bastion, for Lord Varnick, and for everyone else whose lives you destroyed through your greed and ambition." As General Marrow's men prepared to transport Corvin back toward the capital for formal trial and judgment, Elara felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over her, mixed with lingering exhaustion from the danger and tension of the past hours. The investigation that had begun weeks earlier with a single unexpected choice at a crowded auction had finally reached its critical turning point, though she understood that important work still remained before true justice could be fully realized. Bastion arrived moments later, his frail frame moving as quickly as his condition allowed, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering worry as he confirmed Elara remained unharmed despite the danger she had faced. "Princess, you gave me quite a fright, rushing toward such danger without proper protection." "I could not simply watch him escape," Elara said, though exhaustion now colored her voice heavily. "Not after everything we have sacrificed to reach this moment." As the group began their journey back toward the capital, Corvin secured firmly among the guards escorting their return, Elara found her thoughts already turning toward the formal trial that would soon follow, toward the justice that would finally be delivered for her mother's death and for every other life Corvin had destroyed through his corruption and cruelty. The journey back to the capital carried a very different mood than the tense uncertainty that had marked their departure. Though exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone involved, a sense of cautious relief had settled over the group, tempered only by awareness that the difficult work of formal justice still remained ahead. Corvin rode in silence, surrounded by guards, his earlier arrogant confidence replaced entirely by sullen resignation. Word of Corvin's capture had apparently traveled quickly ahead of their return, for as they approached the palace gates, Elara noticed crowds of curious onlookers gathered along the roadside, whispering excitedly among themselves as the procession passed. The story of the princess who had chosen an old, forgotten servant at auction only to uncover a web of corruption reaching to the highest levels of court, had clearly captured the imagination of common people throughout the kingdom. King Aldric awaited their return in the palace's main courtyard, his expression a complex mixture of relief and barely contained anger, as Corvin was finally brought before him in chains. For a long moment, father and daughter simply looked at each other, unspoken understanding passing between them regarding everything that had transpired since Alara's fateful choice at the auction weeks earlier. "You have done what I should have done years ago," King Aldric said quietly, moving to embrace his daughter despite the formal setting surrounding them. "I allowed my grief over your mother's death to prevent me from seeking the truth. You possessed courage I lacked." "We found the truth together, father," Ilara replied gently, "with help from many brave individuals who risked everything to see justice finally served." King Aldric turned his attention toward Corvin, his expression hardening into cold, formal authority, befitting his position as ruler of the kingdom. "Corvin, you stand accused of theft from the royal treasury, the wrongful exile of an innocent physician, complicity in the death of Lord Varnick, and most gravely, the murder of Queen Miriam through poison, disguised as natural illness. You will be held in the palace dungeons until a formal trial can be arranged before the full court, where you will answer for these crimes against the crown and against innocent lives." Corvin said nothing in response, his earlier composure entirely abandoned, replaced by silent, bitter acceptance of the fate that now awaited him. Guards moved to escort him toward the palace dungeons, his footsteps heavy with the weight of impending judgment. In the days that followed, preparations for the formal trial consumed much of the palace's attention. Ilara worked closely alongside General Marrow, Lady Wren, and her father to ensure every piece of evidence was properly organized and presented, determined that justice would be served through legitimate, undeniable means rather than mere accusation. Godfrey, though still recovering from his injuries, sent word that he remained willing to provide written testimony regarding his experiences, understanding that his direct presence at trial might prove too physically demanding given his continued recovery. Master Alden traveled from his northern estate specifically to testify in person, finally given opportunity to speak the truth he had carried silently for so many years. Bastian, too, prepared carefully for his role in the upcoming trial, understanding that his testimony regarding his wrongful exile would carry particular weight given his personal experience with the injustice Corvin had orchestrated against him. Ilara spent many evenings alongside him during this period, discussing not just the practical details of trial preparation, but also reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them together since that fateful day in the crowded auction hall. "I still wonder sometimes," Ilara admitted during one such evening conversation, "what exactly drew me to choose you that day. I could not explain it then, and I am not entirely certain I can explain it even now." Bastian smiled gently, his weathered face showing genuine warmth despite the exhaustion of recent weeks. "Perhaps, Princess, some things simply cannot be fully explained through logic alone. Perhaps you sensed, even without conscious understanding, that something important connected us, some thread of shared injustice that needed to be finally addressed. Whatever the reason," Ilara said sincerely, "I am grateful for that choice, and for everything we have accomplished together since that day." As the day of Corvin's trial finally arrived, the great hall that had once hosted the auction now filled with nobles and common citizens alike, all eager to witness the formal proceedings that would determine the fate of a man who had risen to significant power through years of carefully hidden corruption and violence. Corvin stood before the assembled court, stripped of his usual elaborate finery, dressed instead in simple prison garments that seemed to emphasize how far he had fallen from his previous position of influence and respect. King Aldric presided over the proceedings with solemn formality, while Ilara sat beside him, watching carefully as the carefully gathered evidence was presented before the entire court. Master Alden spoke first, presenting the documented evidence of financial theft, explaining clearly and methodically how Corvin had systematically diverted funds meant for the kingdom's eastern trade routes over many years. His testimony, delivered with quiet dignity despite his own painful history of dismissal and silence, left little room for doubt regarding the financial corruption at the heart of Corvin's crimes. Bastian followed, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of publicly recounting his wrongful accusation and subsequent years of suffering. He described in careful detail how false evidence had been constructed against him, how he had lost everything he had built over decades of honest service, all to eliminate a witness who might have recognized the truth behind Lord Varnick's suspicious death. Godfrey's written testimony was read aloud by a court official, describing the threats he had received years earlier when he attempted to report irregularities in the trade records, threats that had ultimately been renewed and escalated into violence when he agreed to finally speak the truth to Princess Elara. Throughout the presentation of evidence, Corvin remained largely silent, occasionally offering weak protests or attempts to minimize his involvement, though the overwhelming weight of documented evidence and consistent testimony left little room for effective defense. His carefully constructed reputation, built over years of calculated manipulation and deception, crumbled entirely beneath the accumulated truth finally being revealed before the full court. Finally, Elara herself rose to address the assembly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall as she described her own investigation, from that initial unexpected choice at the auction through every subsequent step that had led toward this moment of formal accountability. "My mother discovered Corvin's corruption years ago," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "She paid for that discovery with her life, poisoned and left to suffer, while everyone around her believed her death to be simple, tragic illness. For years, that truth remained hidden, buried beneath careful lies and manipulated evidence. Today, finally, that truth stands revealed before this entire court." As she concluded her testimony, King Aldric rose from his throne, his expression carrying the full weight of his authority as ruler of the kingdom. "Corvin, having heard the overwhelming evidence presented before this court, I find you guilty of theft from the royal treasury, wrongful persecution of an innocent man, complicity in the death of Lord Varnick, and the murder of Queen Miriam through calculated poisoning. For these crimes, you will spend the remainder of your life imprisoned, stripped permanently of any position, wealth, or influence you once held within this kingdom." The formal judgment, delivered with solemn finality, brought a wave of quiet murmurs throughout the assembled court. Though beneath the murmurs, Elara sensed something like collective relief that justice had finally been properly served after so many years of hidden corruption and suffering. As guards moved to escort Corvin from the hall toward his permanent imprisonment, he paused briefly, turning back to look at Elara one final time. Whatever remained of his earlier arrogance had disappeared entirely, replaced by something resembling genuine, if belated, recognition of the harm he had caused throughout his years of calculated ambition. "You have won, Princess," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of its previous confident charm. "Though I wonder if you fully understand the cost of the justice you have pursued so relentlessly." Elara met his gaze steadily, refusing to let his final words diminish the significance of everything they had accomplished together. "The cost of justice, Corvin, will always be worth paying, however difficult the path toward achieving it might prove." As the guards led him away, finally removing him permanently from the palace and the position of influence he had once wielded so carelessly, Elara felt the accumulated weight of weeks of danger and uncertainty finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. Justice, however delayed, had finally been served, both for her mother and for everyone else whose lives had been damaged by Corvin's corruption and cruelty. In the weeks that followed Corvin's trial and formal sentencing, the kingdom slowly began adjusting to the significant changes that had emerged from Elara's determined pursuit of justice. The eastern trade routes, once manipulated for years to serve Corvin's personal enrichment, were carefully reorganized under Lady Wren's capable oversight, ensuring the funds properly benefited the kingdom's overall prosperity rather than lining the pockets of corrupt officials. "Master Alden, whose courage in preserving crucial evidence for so many years had proven instrumental in finally exposing the truth, was formally reinstated to a position of honor within the treasury, his years of quiet suffering finally acknowledged and properly compensated through renewed trust and respect from the crown. Godfrey, recovering steadily from his injuries, received generous compensation from the royal treasury, along with formal recognition for his courage in finally speaking truth despite the personal danger involved. He chose to remain in his modest cottage near Marrow Bay, though he now enjoyed the security of knowing his testimony had contributed meaningfully to bringing a dangerous criminal to justice. For Bastian, the changes proved perhaps most significant of all. King Aldric personally restored his former title and position as royal physician, publicly acknowledging the grave injustice he had suffered through Corvin's calculated manipulation. Though years of exile and hardship could never be fully erased, Bastian found himself finally able to practice his beloved profession once again, offering his considerable skill and wisdom to those within the palace who required medical attention. "It feels strange," Bastian admitted to Alara one afternoon, several weeks after the trial's conclusion, as they walked together through the palace gardens that had become a familiar setting for their many conversations. "After so many years believing I would never again hold a position of respect or purpose, to suddenly find myself restored so completely feels almost like awakening from a very long, difficult dream." "You deserve this restoration, Bastian," Alara said warmly. "Your courage in sharing your story, in helping guide my investigation despite the risks involved, made all the difference in finally bringing the truth to light." "We accomplished this together, Princess," Bastian replied, his weathered face showing genuine contentment despite the difficult years that had preceded this moment of vindication. "Your willingness to look beyond surface appearances, to choose an old, forgotten man over those who seemed more immediately valuable, set everything in motion. I remain deeply grateful for the compassion and courage you demonstrated throughout this entire journey." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of King Aldric, who approached with an expression Ilara had rarely seen upon her father's face in recent years, something resembling genuine peace and contentment rather than the guarded distance that had characterized their relationship since her mother's death. "Ilara," he said, "I wish to speak with you about something important, if you have a moment." "Of course, father," she replied, gesturing for Bastian to remain as her father joined them within the peaceful garden setting. King Aldric settled onto a nearby bench, his expression thoughtful as he gathered his words carefully. "I have spent much time reflecting on everything that has transpired these past months, Ilara. Your mother's death, the corruption that infected our court for so many years, and most significantly, the remarkable courage and determination you demonstrated throughout your investigation. I simply wanted to find the truth, Father," Ilara said gently. "For Mother, for Bastian, and for everyone else who suffered because of Corvin's ambitions." "I understand that now," her father replied. "Though I confess, watching you pursue that truth with such fierce determination reminded me powerfully of your mother's own character. She, too, possessed unwavering commitment to justice, even when pursuing that justice carried significant personal risk." Ilara felt tears gathering in her eyes at her father's words, the comparison to her mother carrying deep emotional significance, given everything they had uncovered together regarding Queen Miriam's tragic death. "I only wish I could have known her better, Father. I wish I could have learned more from her example while she still lived." "You have honored her memory beautifully, Ilara," King Aldric said softly, reaching out to gently take his daughter's hand. "Through your courage, through your unwavering pursuit of justice, despite significant danger, you have demonstrated that her spirit lives on powerfully within you." The three of them sat together in comfortable silence for several long moments, the peaceful garden setting providing welcome respite from the tumultuous weeks that had recently passed. Finally, King Aldric spoke again, his tone shifting toward practical matters requiring attention. "I have been considering how best to formally recognize everyone who contributed to exposing Corvin's corruption," he said. General Marrow and Lady Wren have already received appropriate honors for their crucial support throughout this investigation. But I believe there remains one matter still requiring resolution. What matter is that, Father? Ilara asked curiously. The position of auction master remains vacant, following Corvin's removal, King Aldrich explained. I have given considerable thought to who might best fill that role. Someone who understands deeply the importance of treating every individual with dignity and fairness, regardless of their circumstances or apparent status. Ilara's eyes widened slightly as she began to understand the direction of her father's thoughts. You cannot possibly be suggesting Bastien, Father. He has only just been restored to his position as royal physician. King Aldrich smiled slightly, the expression carrying genuine warmth rather than his usual formal reserve. No, Ilara, though Bastien's wisdom will certainly continue proving valuable in his restored role, I was thinking, rather, of implementing significant reforms to how such auctions are conducted throughout the kingdom, ensuring greater protections and dignity for those whose circumstances have led them into servitude. What sort of reforms? Ilara asked, genuine interest sparking within her at the possibility of meaningful change, extending beyond simply punishing Corvin's individual crimes. I would value your input on this matter significantly, King Aldrich said. You demonstrated remarkable insight in recognizing worth and value in someone that others had entirely overlooked. I believe that same insight could prove invaluable in reshaping how our kingdom approaches such practices moving forward, ensuring greater fairness and protection for all involved. Ilara felt a surge of purpose and excitement at her father's suggestion, recognizing an opportunity to create lasting, positive change, extending far beyond simply resolving the immediate crisis surrounding Corvin's corruption. I would be honored to help develop such reforms, Father. Perhaps we could establish clearer protections against exploitation, ensure fair treatment regardless of circumstances, and create pathways toward eventual freedom for those who demonstrate good conduct and service. These sound like excellent starting principles, King Aldrich agreed. I trust your judgment completely in developing more detailed proposals, Ilara. You have proven yourself remarkably capable throughout these recent challenges, demonstrating wisdom and compassion that will serve our kingdom well as you continue growing into your future responsibilities. Over the following months, Ilara dedicated significant time and effort toward developing comprehensive reforms addressing the treatment of those caught within the kingdom's system of servitude. Working closely alongside Bastien, whose personal experience provided invaluable perspective, along with Lady Wren's practical understanding of trade and economic considerations, she gradually constructed a framework that balanced practical necessity with genuine compassion and dignity for every individual affected by these practices. The reforms, when finally implemented, established clear protections against the kind of exploitation and corruption that had allowed Corvin to operate so freely for years. New oversight mechanisms ensured trade records remained transparent and properly audited, preventing future officials from exploiting their positions for personal gain at the expense of vulnerable individuals or the kingdom's overall welfare. As seasons changed and the kingdom gradually settled into this new era of greater transparency and justice, Ilara found herself reflecting often on the remarkable journey that had begun with a single unexpected choice in a crowded auction hall. She had entered that hall as a princess fulfilling obligatory duty, uncertain and somewhat disconnected from the true weight of the choices being made around her. She emerged from the subsequent months of investigation and danger as someone entirely transformed, possessing a clear sense of purpose and unwavering commitment to justice that would guide her throughout whatever future responsibilities awaited her. Bastien, now fully restored to his position of respect and purpose within the palace, remained a close friend and trusted advisor to Ilara, their bond forged through shared danger and mutual commitment to truth, proving remarkably resilient even as circumstances around them continued evolving. He often remarked, during quiet moments together, how remarkable it seemed that a single act of compassion, choosing an old forgotten man over those who appeared more immediately valuable, had ultimately transformed not just his own life, but the entire trajectory of the kingdom's future. "Do you ever wonder," Ilara asked him one evening, many months after Corvin's trial had concluded, "what might have happened if I had chosen differently that day? If I had selected the strong young man, or the woman with striking red hair, rather than noticing you standing quietly in the shadows?" Bastian considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "I believe, Princess, that some choices carry significance beyond what we can immediately perceive. Perhaps you were always destined to notice what others overlooked, to recognize value where others saw only weakness or insignificance. That quality, more than any single choice, defines who you truly are." Ilara smiled warmly at his words, recognizing the truth within them, even as she continued reflecting on the remarkable journey that had unfolded since that fateful day. The kingdom had changed significantly since Corvin's corruption had first been exposed, moving steadily toward greater justice and transparency in ways that would benefit countless individuals for generations to come. Her mother's memory, once shrouded in painful mystery and unexplained loss, now carried renewed meaning, understood finally as the memory of someone who had valued truth and justice enough to risk everything in pursuit of exposing corruption, even when that pursuit ultimately cost her life. Ilara understood now that she carried forward that same legacy, that same unwavering commitment to justice that had defined her mother's character and that now increasingly defined her own path forward as future ruler of the kingdom. As she looked toward the future, toward continued responsibilities and challenges that would undoubtedly arise as she grew into her eventual role as queen, Ilara felt genuine confidence and purpose guiding her forward. The lessons learned throughout this difficult journey, the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, of valuing genuine worth over superficial impressions, of pursuing truth and justice regardless of personal risk, would continue shaping her decisions and character throughout whatever future challenges awaited. The story that had begun with a single unexpected choice in a crowded auction hall had ultimately transformed not just Ilara's own life, but the broader trajectory of an entire kingdom, demonstrating powerfully how genuine compassion and unwavering commitment to justice could overcome even deeply entrenched corruption, however powerful or well-hidden that corruption might initially appear. And as Ilara continued forward into her future responsibilities, she carried with her the profound understanding that true worth often lies hidden beneath surfaces others too easily overlook, waiting patiently for someone willing to look closer, to choose compassion over convenience, and to pursue truth regardless of whatever obstacles or dangers that pursuit might ultimately require facing.